Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Marty Mascari. I'm with let me turn on my camera. I did that this morning. I have to turn off and then turn it back on. Sorry. Good morning, everybody. I'm Marty Mascari with the North Central Texas Area Agency on Aging and the North Central Texas Aging and Disability Resource Center. The Aging and Disability Resource Center is a project of the Area Agency on Aging, and the Area Agency on Aging and the Resource Center are under the umbrella of the North Central Texas Council of Governments. We're blessed here today. Once again, our partnership with the James L. West Center for Dementia Care in Fort Worth. We've got Hollie Glover and Jamie Cobb Tinsley that have been great partners of ours for almost 2 years now, I think, putting on these webinars. And they're here with us today again to talk about Huntington's disease, Lyme disease, and stress and how they affect the brain. But before we get started, we're going to talk about CEUs. And Jamie, do you want to go over that?
Sure. Thank you, Marty. And we are more than happy to provide free 1-hour credits for nursing, social work, licensed counselors, and anybody that wants a certificate of attendance for attending this program. You will receive a evaluation either this afternoon or tomorrow through Marty that will have a link to a SurveyMonkey evaluation. Please complete that link. We ask everybody to do the evaluation just to help us with our feedback and make sure our programs are what you are needing and expecting. But if you need CE credits, you must complete the evaluation to get that credit. And if you will please allow, the link and the evaluation will be open until the end of the day on July 18th. So you get a good week there to complete the evaluation. And then if you will give us at least 2 to 3 weeks after that to process all the CE certificates and get them out to you, you will receive them in the email that you provide. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much, Jamie. In addition to theirs, I just want you to know that we have also our own survey. It's set up in Google Survey. It should pop up as you log out of Zoom today. And it's basically for feedback for our objectives for the money we applied for to put on these webinars. And so we've got to give our funders feedback. And so if you will please complete that. If it doesn't pop up, I know some of you have pop-up blockers, please see that link in the follow-up email with the documents from Jamie, the links for Jamie's evaluation as well. So turn it over to Hollie Glover to talk to us about Huntington's disease, Lyme disease, and stress.
All right. Thanks, Marty. So we are happy and excited to be back with you this month as we have been kind of doing a series here on some of the lesser known diseases that still fall under that dementia umbrella. And so this month we are talking about Huntington's disease, Lyme disease, and we're going to talk about stress. That stress can actually lead to dementia. That may have some of us panicked a little bit, but we're going to get to that. So here's our objectives for those of you who are needing those CEUs. Let's start with Huntington's disease. You may also have heard it called Huntington's chorea. This is a rare disease. In your entire career, if you work in this, your entire career, you may come across this just a handful of times. But it's an interesting disease. So fewer than 200,000 cases per year in the United States. And we are really going to see a lot of it in families. And we're going to describe exactly what we see in Huntington's. I've got a short video clip of Huntington's and what that looks like. Same thing with Lyme disease, and same thing. We're going to watch just a short video clip on stress with each of these. So let's look specifically with Huntington's. The progression and duration of this disease can be from 10 to 30 years. And usually we start to see symptoms in a person's 30s, 40s, 50s. If it develops in someone's 20s, it's called juvenile Huntington's disease. And it looks a little bit different if that happens. So this graphic does a really good job of explaining what's going on with Huntington's. With the exception of genes on the sex chromosomes, a person inherits 2 copies of every gene, 1 copy from each parent. A parent with a defective gene could pass along the defective gene of the gene or the healthy copy. Each child in the family, therefore, has a 50% chance of inheriting the gene that causes the genetic disorder. You heard that correctly. So with Huntington's disease, each child has a 50-50 chance of inheriting the Huntington's disease gene. Let's look at an MRI of Huntington's disease and see what's going on in the brain and why Huntington's falls under the dementia umbrella. Many of you have been on our other programs, and so you know what I'm talking about when I say the dementia umbrella. That word dementia is just an umbrella term, like cancer is an umbrella term. If someone were to say my loved one has cancer, we would immediately say what kind or what type. If someone says my loved one has dementia, what kind or what type? Huntington's falls under that umbrella. Alzheimer's is the most common kind or type of dementia, but there's over 130 different types of dementia. Huntington's falls under that umbrella. Look what's happening to the brain. And we're going to talk specifically, here's another graphic so that you can see what's happening. There's the normal brain on the left, and with the Huntington's brain, it has these enlarged ventricles. But because of that, what starts happening? One of the things that happens is a movement disorder, and that's where we get the word chorea. And the word chorea is the Latin word for dance. When somebody is fairly early to mid in Huntington's chorea, they have what looks like an involuntary writhing or jerking movement where it almost is a sway from side to side. That second graphic there, it's a medical condition. It is a movement disorder. And many times they're not even realizing what their body is doing. They can become very rigid, slow or abnormal eye movements, impaired gait, an abnormal body posture, balance is off, difficulty with their speech, eventually difficulty with swallowing. Let's look at what's going on with the cognitive disorders with Huntington's. So it looks, because we hear that word dementia, we're going to think Alzheimer's and vascular Lewy body and frontotemporal, those that we hear of all the time. This looks very different. The one person that I've had in my entire career that had Huntington's, very, very, very OCD, obsessive compulsive about things. All of these are common. This difficulty organizing, prioritizing, and staying on task. Getting stuck on a thought. There's where that OCD can come in. And hanging on that thought, behavior, or action. And many times the thought, behavior, or action to us doesn't make any sense. The resident that I had would not go to sleep at night until there were paper towels all over the floor. She didn't want to be able to see any of the floor. She wanted paper towels covering all of the carpet. That made sense to her. So we covered the floor with paper towels. Just like with all the dementias, where we're going to meet them where they are, we're not going to try to be rational and reasonable. Why is that? Because look at that brain right there. Executive functioning, it's gone. We're going to go to their world. They can't come to ours. And if that's part of the disease, we're going to accommodate the disease. They can't. They would if they could. Lack of impulse control. But this lack of impulse control can result in outbursts where they act without thinking. They can have some sexual promiscuity. lack of awareness of what's going on with their own body and their behaviors and their abilities, having a very hard time learning new information, and you can really start to have some psychiatric disorders. Depression and anxiety, insomnia, fatigue, frequent thoughts of dying, can become obsessed with dying or even suicide. There's the OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, mania, and weight loss. So let's look at how it progresses. We said if someone has a parent that has Huntington's disease, there's that 50-50 chance of it being passed to their children. So first thing, of course, is that family and medical history, neurological exams, psych evals, and brain imaging. But the clinical stages of Huntington's disease there is over in that the chart where it has early, middle, and late. And so early on, look at kind of what starts. It just starts with clumsiness, dropping things, maybe some falls. Their gait is starting to be off a little bit. Agitation, irritability, personality changes. And in the video we're going to watch, the caregiver is early in the disease that we're going to see. She's taking care of her brother who's late in the disease. So we're actually going to get to see people at kind of opposite ends of the disease. Interesting. Now, where she is in the disease, she does not have any of the chorea. So she does not have the sway. And then the late stage of the disease listed there as well. And there you see dementia right there at the late stage of the disease. It doesn't show up until later. It's not something that happens immediately, but it is later in the disease as the disease progresses. So what do we do about Huntington's disease? There isn't a treatment. There's not a treatment. What can we do? We can treat the symptoms. We can do what we can to keep them comfortable. Medications are available to help manage the symptoms, but they cannot prevent the physical, mental, and behavioral decline associated with the condition. It is progressive. It is terminal. There are medications that can help with the chorea. So there's medications that can help with the movement disorder. There are antipsychotics that can help, especially with the impulse control and the violent outburst, and with the hallucinations, because there's a lot of hallucinations that go along with Huntington's. There are medications that help with anxiety and depression, which then also helps with some of the other symptoms. They are going to go in and out of physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy throughout the course of the disease. And another thing with Huntington's, especially since they can even do genetic testing to see if they have the gene, they have time to do some planning, advanced planning. Let's watch that video that I was telling you about. She's going to be very specific and tell you their story. So this is going to be the sister who is taking care of her brother, and her dad and another sister have already passed away from the disease. So please listen to the story of this family living with Huntington's. Oh, sorry.
Are you ready to come eat lunch? You see him laughing because she scared my mom. Do you want to put your chair down, or do you want me to do it? They call it a monster disease. So are you ready to go out to the kitchen and eat? It's like having Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and ALS all together, because you have symptoms of all three of those diseases. 1, 2, 3. At this point, it's considered a terminal illness because they do not have a cure for it. Eventually, your muscles give away and you can't swallow or walk or feel yourself get incontinent and stuff like that. My dad got diagnosed when I was 6. They just drugged him up because they didn't know much about the disease yet. I just know that it was a struggle growing up. She passed away 4 years ago from the same thing. He likes soups and stuff, so we do a lot of soup. My brother Mike, we noticed 20 years ago when my dad died that he was starting the symptoms. So between me and my mom for the last year, we've been taking care of him. Nope, go to the chair. We're gonna eat at the table. I have to make his meals. I have to help him get dressed. He stumbles a lot, so whenever he's up, I'm right behind him. Keep going. Okay, go ahead, sit. We've decided as a family and him that he wants to be here with me. And as long as I can physically do it, this is where he's going to stay and take the best care I can. Do you want half of this or do you want the whole thing? No, this. Half or whole? Half. Myself, I found out in 2006 that I had the gene. I mean, it changed my whole outlook on life. Like, I'm the most negative Nancy there is. I'm trying to get better about it, you know, but it's kind of hard when, especially when you're handed a paper, you know, and that says, you know, you have a terminal illness and you just gotta write it out and hope for the best. It is progressing, and this is right at that age 46, you know, between 40 and 50 is when your symptoms really start to rear their ugly heads. Remember, drink some of your water. Just you full? I figured. It's still a work in progress with my brain, you know, because I don't know if I'm getting the placebo or the drug, but I'm trying really, really hard to change my outlook towards it because, you know, whether I'm on the drug or not, at the end of it, I'm going to get the drug. 1, 2, 3. Good job. Fist bump. Fist bump me. Thank you. Look, this is what I have. You know, I'm going to fight it for as much as I can. And, you know, eventually there's going to be a cure. Keep going a little bit more. If not a cure, an active treatment to increase my quality of life by like 20 years. Because if I'm in the beginning stages of it now, my quality of life with stress and stuff will go down fast. And then I will be like my brother and my other sister. And I don't want that. On the other side. Are you comfortable? Yeah. Okay.
I hope there were a couple of things that you picked up there. First of all, she was giving him choices. So she was saying to him, do you want half or do you want whole? She wasn't just going in and automatically taking over and doing for him. And these are some of the things we want to make sure and do with anybody who has any type of a dementia as we come alongside them. We don't just go in and take over. So she was still giving him choices. You may have also noticed that he was using adaptive devices. So he had his walker, but he also had what was called a weighted spoon. And so he had an adaptive utensil. You can buy those on Amazon, by the way, and they're great for people who have Parkinson's or who has any type of a tremor. That's allowing him to continue to feed himself longer, but there's a weight in the end of it, and it had a bigger grip so that he could hold on to that so he can continue to have dignity and independence longer. You also saw that she was giving him soup, but it wasn't in a bowl. She had it in a plate that was a divided plate. Also, you may have noticed that he was answering her back with one word. He could still speak, but he was speaking with one word. And you also heard her say that she was part of a research project and taking what she didn't know. Was she getting the new medication or was she getting a placebo, hoping to extend her life and have some quality of life? Because she knows now that she is in the beginning stages. She's already lost her dad. She's already lost her sister. Her brother's in the end stage of the disease. Okay, let's move on to Lyme disease. Lyme disease, of all things, that falls under the dementia umbrella. And yes, we are talking about that Lyme disease, the one that is caused by the deer tick. So Lyme disease is transmitted by the bite of an infected black-legged tick, commonly known as the deer tick. And there's a picture of it right there. And look how tiny that is, because that's on a person's fingertip that you're looking at. It's very, very rare. It happens in less than 2% of all cases that you happen to get a tick that is infected with this particular type of bacteria. So please don't hear that everybody with Lyme disease is going to develop Alzheimer's. That's not the case. It's only the ticks who have this particular type of bacteria, which can lead to Alzheimer's. So let's look at some more about this. You're more likely to get Lyme disease if you live or spend time in grassy and heavily wooded areas where ticks thrive. And it's important to make common sense precautions in tick-infested areas. And then let's look at what happens to the brain with Lyme disease. Now, there's something else that can happen with Lyme disease, and this is called Lyme-induced dementia. And Lyme-induced dementia is actually reversible. Now, in healthcare, and those of you who work in healthcare, we hate it whenever they use the word a reversible dementia. We would rather they use the word reversible memory loss, because there is sometimes a reversible memory loss. Somebody becomes septic, they have a medication interaction, their thyroid gets out of whack, and they start having memory issues. Someone's really depressed can have real memory issues. And then they get that corrected and the memory issues go away. But this is what it's called, Lyme-induced dementia. So let's look at the first bullet point. Dementia-like symptoms: progressive cognitive decline, loss of weight, a gait disturbance, and a tremor, treated with antibiotics, and they have a rapid recovery. So how do we know that this isn't that other that happens because of the bacteria? Because it comes on rapidly. And progressive terminal dementias like Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, frontotemporal dementias, Huntington's disease, those types of dementias, those do not come on overnight. I take that back. Some vascular dementias do after a stroke, but all of the other dementias do not come on rapidly. They come on over the course of many, many years usually. But this one can come on rapidly and then it can go away. It can have a rapid recovery. Now, this particular scan is an MRS scan. It's down there on that bottom bullet point so that you can see what happens in the brain. And let's take a look at Lyme disease, what's going on. And this is the progression over 2 weeks of that tick bite. Look how it starts. It kind of looks like a bullseye. Number 1, and then 2, 3, and 4. You can see how it's getting worse over the course of the 2 weeks. So let's look at early signs and symptoms. It looks like a mosquito bite in the beginning, and people may not think anything of it. The rest of this can start happening within a month, all the way up to 30 days. You can kind of start getting that bullseye. It can get up to 12 inches across. It's usually not even itchy or very painful, but it can be very warm to the touch. And then the person can start to have fever and chills and fatigue and body aches, headache, neck stiffness. After these symptoms, that rash can start to spread if it's untreated. It can go into joint pain and swelling, especially to the knees. And in this video we're going to watch on Lyme disease, he's going to talk a little bit more about that. And then the neurological problems can set in. And look what it says, weeks, months, or even years after the initial infection. Because what's happening is inflammation to the membranes of the brain, and that is called meningitis. There can be that temporary paralysis of one side of the face, and that is called Bell's palsy, numbness or weakness in the limbs, and then impaired muscle movement. Let's watch a short video about Lyme disease, and why it also falls under the dementia umbrella.
Lyme disease affects the patient in many different ways. It depends on which stage of the disease we're looking at. In the first stage, the early stage, that occurs about 7 to 10 days after tick bite, Lyme disease affects the skin where the tick bit the person. The skin is infected with the bacteria, and it causes a round or oval red skin lesion called erythema migrans. And that may or may not be associated with kind of flu-like symptoms, like feeling flu-like, achy, chills, sweats, fatigue, malaise. And that combination of the skin lesion and those flu-like symptoms are the primary manifestations of the first stage of Lyme disease. If you don't treat the first stage of Lyme disease, then in many patients, probably more than half, the bacteria leaves the skin where it was initially inoculated and goes through the bloodstream to other areas of the body. And then the manifestations change because now other areas of the body are infected, primarily the nervous system, the joints, and the heart. And so those manifestations are different. If it affects the nervous system, it may cause what's called a Bell's palsy or a drooping face. It can cause meningitis with headache and stiff neck. And it can cause heart problems if the bacteria goes to the heart. Those heart problems are usually a slow heart rate that may cause the person to pass out or feel like they're going to pass out. The symptoms of second stage Lyme disease are probably often the most difficult to ascertain. They are symptoms such as fatigue, generalized achiness of the muscles and joints, and sometimes patients also know what they call brain fog type cognitive symptoms, where they have trouble with short-term memory and trouble multitasking. These symptoms, though, again, are not specific for Lyme disease, and sometimes can make the diagnosis of second stage Lyme disease very difficult. Now, if we have objective signs such as facial palsy or heart abnormalities or meningitis, then we can more easily make the diagnosis of second stage Lyme disease. But in the absence of those outward manifestations of disease, relying on the symptoms alone is often problematic. Physicians may not think of second stage Lyme disease in somebody who has a fatigue or generalized achiness. And so we really have to think about it and then order the appropriate testing to make that diagnosis. The third stage doesn't occur for months or even years later, and that stage is called late Lyme arthritis. That's where a joint, usually a knee joint, swells up and has fluid accumulation and pain. And that's actually the way the disease was discovered in Lyme, Connecticut. There was an outbreak of joint arthritis in young children. So the symptoms vary a lot depending on what stage we're talking about.
So a person can actually be misdiagnosed for a long time, like he was saying. They are working, and this is at Johns Hopkins, they are working on making sure that they are asking the right questions early on, because it can mimic or look like many other things. All right, I want to spend the rest of our time talking about stress and what stress can do and how stress can actually change the brain. It can change our brain. And if we're not careful, it can change our brain permanently. So let's look at what is stress. Well, all of us have our own definition of stress, and what I think stress is and what you think stress is can be two completely different things, because it's what we see as a challenge or as a threat to our well-being. It's what we perceive as a challenge or a threat. It's how our body responds. And look at this: mentally, emotionally, physically, and behaviorally to a perceived change, demand, or event. Now, here's something else that's interesting. Between 75 and 90%, more than 75% of all doctor's office visits are for stress-related ailments and complaints. More than 75%. And some statistics say all the way up to 90% of all doctor's office visits are for a stress-related ailment and complaint. Think about the last time you were at the doctor. What were you in there for? So it's something to do with stress. When you really dig down to it, and you may be saying, no, I was in there for my irritable bowel syndrome. Well, for many people, irritable bowel syndrome is how stress manifests itself, because when we're dumping cortisol, digestive system shuts off. We're going to look at that in just a minute. Everyone defines and responds to stress differently, and everyone has a different threshold for stress. And aren't we different at different times, depending on what's going on in our life? Demand can come from the inside. What are you demanding from yourself? Or demand can come from the outside. So let's look at what stress does to your body. And yes, you're getting these slides. If you haven't already, you're getting these slides. I think Marty's already put them in the chat, but you're getting the slides. These are some of the things that stress does to our bodies. Now, most of us are completely aware of what it does because of what it does to you, but you may have some of these other things going on and going, that is related to stress. Like I just mentioned, IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. And you may not have even realized that could be linked to stress. It's one of the most common things that caregivers of those that have dementia have happen, is that they start having issues. They're having lots of stomach issues because they're staying on high alert all the time. When we start having issues with our mood, we're staying angry. Anger's the easiest emotion. I'm a licensed professional counselor. Easiest emotion for most people to go to, anger. Because if I get mad and I get loud, and maybe I get ugly and I say some mean things, or I get really broad, I'm in control now. And I'll get you to shut up. I'm taking power. I'm going to be in control, because usually there's a lot of things in my life that I'm not in control over. And at the root of anger, many, many times is fear. When you can really get somebody to talk, the root of anger most of the time is fear. Let's look at some warning signs and look at the physical effects. When you get these slides, I hope you'll run them off, or I hope that as you're looking at this, that you're going down that and kind of making a list, making check marks. Get your highlighter. Be honest with yourself. Take this into your doctor and go, I've got this. Because this can lead to chronic illness. This can lead to disease if we don't take care of it. And again, you may be thinking, oh, I've been living with it up to this point. That's right. You've been living with it up to this point until you don't, or until it happens. What is it? The stroke, the heart attack. And I'm not saying that as a scare tactic. I'm saying it because I've worked in this field for a long time, and I've looked in the face of the caregiver, one caregiver in particular, as she had a stroke. I was walking her to the door after she checked her mom in to stay with us, and she had a stroke looking in my face. I've been to too many caregivers' funerals. Look at these warning signs. These are physical warning signs. Here are some mental and cognitive effects of stress. Look at that first one, memory impairment. Today, we were talking in a class about how many times caregivers of those with dementia will say, I think I'm catching it. I think I've got it. I think I've got dementia. And it's not dementia. They are having some memory issues, but it's because of stress. Maybe we're becoming a little more accident prone. We're even getting clumsy. We can't focus. We can't keep our attention. Now, please keep in mind, whenever somebody is taking care of a person that has dementia, they are going through grief. They're going through something called ambiguous grief. Ambiguous grief is when we are grieving the loss of the living. So grieving is a natural part of caring for someone with dementia. And so some of these things that we're going through, they're part of grief, but they're also part of stress. So now we've got grief and we've got stress going on. It can burn us out. Stress can start to hide, and it can start showing up as hopelessness. It can start to show up as anxiety. It can show up as depression. But then we can start doing things like becoming paranoid. We can start having delusions. And then we can get to the point that we may even start having suicidal thoughts ourselves. Some warning signs with stress. When we start finishing that bottle of wine instead of having the one drink that we used to have, warning sign. When we are self-medicating, and that is very common, those of you that are on here that work in healthcare, there are more healthcare workers that develop alcohol-induced and drug-induced dementia than any other field. So we don't ask for help. I don't need any help. I know what I'm doing. I've got letters after my name. I've got degrees hanging on the wall. Don't need anybody to help me. Help myself. How am I helping myself? It is okay to have feelings that aren't normal for you during a time that's not normal. And haven't we just lived through a time that wasn't normal? So it was okay for us to be having feelings we'd never felt before. We just lived through something we'd never lived through before. But now we're coming out of that messy middle. Hopefully, we're pulling out of that messy middle. We are not going back to the way things were. We're not to that new normal yet. We're on our way. But if you're finding or seeing these type things in yourself, those are warning signs. There have been studies done that actually show links between long-term chronic stress and people developing dementia later in life. And why is that? Because the brain starts to change. When we don't have the balance of the chemicals that we need to have, the brain starts to change. When our body stays on high alert and it's ready to react rather than respond to a situation that seems dangerous all the time, and we're living on cortisol and we're living on adrenaline, it's linked to memory problems. It's linked to depression. It's linked to anxiety. We know that there's those things that we can do for healthy brain aging, managing stress, eating that Mediterranean-based diet, or the MIND diet now. There's a MIND diet, M-I-N-D, MIND diet. Regular productive sleep, exercise, lifestyle changes is usually number one, making sure that we're going and having wise counsel, getting counseling. Nothing wrong with that. Relaxation techniques. Another study, chronic stress playing that role in the development of depression and other emotional disorders. But prolonged and constant feelings, those long-term changes in the brain, are going to make us more prone to mood and anxiety disorders as well. And we know that with depression, 80% of the time, 80% of the time, we can cure depression. But there is such a stigma on depression that people don't ask for help. 80% of the time, we can completely cure it. And it is not always with antidepressants. Sometimes it is. But there's lots of ways to treat the symptoms of depression. 100% of the time, we can usually ease the symptoms. But 80% of the time, we can usually cure it. Why would we not do that? Luckily, we finally have some celebrities and some people who play sports that are starting to talk about their own battles with depression and making it a little more normal for those of us who care what anybody thinks. But there's a stigma attached. So what is happening in the brain whenever somebody has a lot of stress? We've talked about that it's changing the chemicals in the brain. It starts to actually change the structure of the brain. It changes the gray matter, it changes the white matter. So what's going on? Look at that third bullet point, the gray matter. Those neurons and cells responsible for higher order thinking, such as decision-making and problem solving. And the white matter communicates information from one region of the brain to the other. So it's suggested, the psychologist suggests that only that bad stress impacts the brain in this way. Good stress, the type that helps us perform well in the face of a challenge, helps in a positive way that leads to this great word, resilience. Because we need some stress, helps us develop resilience. So what's going on with our brain then? They either become very vulnerable or very resilient. Stress is killing our brain cells. Look at the study in that first bullet point. A single 20-minute stressful situation killed neurons in the hippocampus. They concluded that stress didn't impact the ability to create new neurons. It impacted the ability of those new neurons to survive. So they could still create some neurons, but neurons were dying. But here's the good news. Antidepressants may help keep the vulnerable new neurons alive. And in all of the studies, everything that I have read about this, it shows that if people treat depression, we've got a whole nother program we do on depression and dementia, that if people treat their depression, the chances then of that turning into dementia down the road changes those numbers. Because if we treat the depression, it's not turning into dementia. It's when we're living with that depression and we're not treating it. Even that minor stress, how many of you are going, where are my keys? Where are my glasses? And they're on your head. Why did I come in this room? We've all done it. High levels of cortisol connected to short-term memory loss. Okay, I want us to see this short film on how chronic stress affects your brain.
Are you sleeping restlessly, feeling irritable or moody, forgetting little things, and feeling overwhelmed and isolated? Don't worry, we've all been there. You're probably just stressed out. Stress isn't always a bad thing. It can be handy for a burst of extra energy and focus, like when you're playing a competitive sport or have to speak in public. But when it's continuous, the kind most of us face day in and day out, it actually begins to change your brain. Chronic stress, like being overworked or having arguments at home, can affect brain size, its structure, and how it functions, right down to the level of your genes. Stress begins with something called the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, a series of interactions between endocrine glands in the brain and on the kidney, which controls your body's reaction to stress. When your brain detects a stressful situation, your HPA axis is instantly activated and releases a hormone called cortisol, which primes your body for instant action. But high levels of cortisol over long periods of time wreak havoc on your brain. For example, chronic stress increases the activity level and number of neural connections in the amygdala, your brain's fear center. And as levels of cortisol rise, electric signals in your hippocampus, the part of the brain associated with learning, memories, and stress control, deteriorate. The hippocampus also inhibits the activity of the HPA axis, so when it weakens, so does your ability to control your stress. That's not all though. Cortisol can literally cause your brain to shrink in size. Too much of it results in the loss of synaptic connections between neurons and the shrinking of your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that regulates behaviors like concentration, decision-making, judgment, and social interaction. It also leads to fewer new brain cells being made in the hippocampus. This means chronic stress might make it harder for you to learn and remember things, and also set the stage for more serious mental problems like depression and eventually Alzheimer's disease. The effects of stress may filter right down to your brain's DNA. An experiment showed that the amount of nurturing a mother rat provides its newborn baby plays a part in determining how that baby responds to stress later in life. The pups of nurturing moms turned out less sensitive to stress because their brains developed more cortisol receptors, which stick to cortisol and dampen the stress response. The pups of negligent moms had the opposite outcome, and so became more sensitive to stress throughout life. These are considered epigenetic changes, meaning that they affect which genes are expressed without directly changing the genetic code. And these changes can be reversed if the moms are swapped. But there's a surprising result. The epigenetic changes caused by one single mother rat were passed down to many generations of rats after her. In other words, the results of these actions were inheritable. It's not all bad news though. There are many ways to reverse what cortisol does to your stressed brain. The most powerful weapons are exercise and meditation, which involves breathing deeply and being aware and focused on your surroundings. Both of these activities decrease your stress and increase the size of the hippocampus, thereby improving your memory. So don't feel defeated by the pressures of daily life. Get in control of your stress before it takes control of you.
All right. This is on caring for yourself, recognizing our limits. We've got to be realistic and be clear about what we can and cannot do. One of the things we say in our support groups so often is that I can do anything, but I can't do everything. Learning how to ask for help. We also use KISS, K-I-S-S, keep it simple and keep it sane. Decide and take action, making lists, managing our expectations, and being kind to ourselves. He mentioned meditation. We've got more ways to relax listed on here, things that we can do, and maybe things that we know to do, but we haven't done in some time. When was the last time we made some time to go get a massage, or that we talked about this with somebody? Or when did we laugh? Did we really laugh? Are you journaling? Are you practicing gratitude? We mentioned following that healthy lifestyle, watching what we're eating. Has it become just really easy to go through the drive-through? Making sure that we reach out, social connections. It's a great stress reliever. Having somebody to talk to, and also having someone who can distract you from other things that are going on. Our emotional and spiritual well-being. Being careful also about what we're putting in. Be careful about what you're reading, watching, looking at on social media, watching on the news. If you're still watching the news, I think a lot of people stop doing that. Changing that negative thinking to change your brain. Cognitive behavior therapy. Individuals who hold negative beliefs about aging are more likely to have brain changes associated with Alzheimer's disease, a study out of Yale. Spiritual activity, meditation, prayer, and reflection. Again, you're going to see meditation come up over and over again. Mindfulness is another thing that you will see come up over and over and over again. There's our resources where we got a lot of our information. Here's our information at the West Center. You can always reach out to me or to Jamie to further discuss anything that you saw. If you have questions about anything that we talked about today, and we will look at questions in just a minute. I'm going to have Jamie, if you're there, Jamie, hop back on and talk just a minute about the CEUs again for those that may have come on late.
Yes, thank you. You will receive your follow-up email from Marty in the next day or two, and there will be an evaluation to a SurveyMonkey, or a link to a SurveyMonkey evaluation. If you will please complete that evaluation, you will receive your CE certificates within 3 to 4 weeks. But we are requiring you for you to complete that evaluation so we can process those certificates and get those to you in a timely manner. So, thank you.
Additionally, I'm going to add real quick that we have a Google survey that will should pop up as you close out today. And I will also send a link to that Google survey in the follow-up email. And that is for our funding sources, for our objectives that we set forth when we applied for our funding. So if you can complete that as well, we'd certainly appreciate it. Our next one, which is coming up, and we'll leave this up unless you want to go back to your contact information, leave that, whatever one you want to, but managing hygiene and dementia. We're going to talk about toileting and bathing on the 26th of July. So 2 weeks from today. And I know there were a few comments, people were asking about links and that kind of thing. I don't know if you had a chance to.
I am looking at it. Let me see here. And then I also see a question. How do we get help from a primary caregiver? Medicaid doesn't offer it. No other family members. I know stress is a problem. We actually have some information. Marty, I know we have the program that we did with Donnie, where she had a lot of information for family caregivers. They can also continue to get
Yes.
help for the family caregiver. And we are going to be doing that program again that has those, but that's not coming up for a while.
And I have the recording, just so you know, and I'll throw this out. Please, if you will, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We have all of the past webinars recorded up on the YouTube channel. And if you go into the bottom underneath the recording, you will also see the links to the slides and the handouts and all of that information that I send to you in the follow-up emails, with the exception of the CEU information. But please just subscribe to the YouTube channel. You'll see when I send the follow-up email, you'll see that at the bottom. There's a place to subscribe to our Facebook and a place to subscribe to the YouTube channel.
And I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, that particular program was called Dementia and Depression, how to get a correct diagnosis for each. Wasn't that the name of it? Dementia versus Depression. And then it had all those resources at the end that Donnie did. Yes,
and resources to help is at the end of it. It was dementia, depression and dementia, depression versus dementia or something like that.
Yeah, I think it is. Depression. Yeah.
Depression.
So if you look on that page, you can find that program there. And Donnie Green does a little section at the end and has pages of resources that are there for caregivers also.
And just note, depending on how many your YouTube channel set to show as you look at it, you might have to adjust pages at the bottom because there's a lot of videos on there.
Stress and also, a lot of our information we get comes from the Rosalind Carter Institute, because the Rosalind Carter Institute is a caregiver institute where they do many, many studies with caregivers of those who are taking care of people with dementia, as well as other caregivers. So they have many resources, and it's at I think it's rosalindcarter.org. Was that on our information on our resource page?
It's on our resource page.
Yeah, it's on our resource page. So,
I'll send out a link to your resource page in the follow-up.
Thank you. Well, we appreciate everybody being here. If you think of other questions, our information was one of those last slides, and you can reach out to me or to Jamie or to Marty to get in touch with us. And we were glad you were here today.
Great. Thank you all so much. Thank you guys for partnering. Great job as always. And thank you all. I'm sorry, I didn't do. Go ahead, Hollie.
Nope, I was just saying thanks.
Thank you all for joining us. We certainly appreciate it. Y'all have a wonderful day. Take care, Jamie. Take care.